So today's Cardinal lesson, we're talking about what do you do when you have tax problems? I'm talking about getting a notice from the IRS or one of your relatives has passed away. Maybe you're the executor and you start realizing this person that passed away that's related to you, maybe your father, your mother hadn't filed their tax returns for a few years, and you got all this mess in front of you. Um, we're going to have some case studies today, but what we want to talk about is an IRS enrolled agent, which might be a new term to some of you. And we're going to define that today. What is an IRS enrolled agent and how can they possibly help you? So, what an IRS enrolled agent has earned the privilege of representing taxpayers before the IRS. So, this is a person that can represent you per the IRS, they can represent you to the IRS. And it's the highest credential that the IRS awards. It's they can do several things. They can do tax preparation, they can do your return, prepare it. They can, if you're a person that has to file a tax return for another person who may be deceased or can't take care of their own affairs, they can do that for you. They can remove a tax lien, or they can talk to the IRS about doing that, a wage garnishment, a levy release. They can do an offer in compromise, and a few more items that he'll go into later. And one of the biggest things that I've found helpful is they can obtain a transcript from past years of all those things the IRS mails, or the 1099s that your financial institutions mailed to your parent who's deceased or in a nursing home or something. And they can go to the IRS and get a transcript of all of those for past years, so you don't have to go hunting those down. So what I'd like to do is just bring on our guest today, who is an enrolled agent, Chris Cherico. Hi, Chris.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah. And so we've got his phone number and his website out on the board. And the focus today is we really want to teach you, and we want Chris to teach you, what an enrolled agent is, and then specifically how they can help you and when you might need them. And so when we're here, I want to go to Tom, and I want Tom to talk about why are we doing this video today? What's the why behind this, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this video because in a lot of our videos, if you've been watching, and in our practice, we do a lot of tax planning, a lot of forward looking planning. But we are not able to actually file your tax returns. If we find a mistake, we're not actually able to correct that. And so we use Chris, or someone like Chris, who can represent you to the IRS. He can actually do the things that we're not able to do. We know you need to do them. We know what needs to be done, but he's the one who can actually do it. And so we love working with Chris. He's great to work with. And so let me bring up the show notes really quick. We'll get those out of the way. You can find these at the link below on our video. They're also on our website. Like always, we have the board there, and so a lot of people print this out. If you're watching on your phone, it's probably a little bit small. So go to our website, print these out. You can see a little bit more. Again, it has Chris's number on there. It has his website on there. So if you want to contact him directly, you can do so. And then we have just a little bit more of a definition of what an enrolled agent is. So pretty light on the show notes today, but again, pretty good context. And so what I think we want to start the video today as we get going and really bring Chris in here is we just have a couple of questions that we, give Chris a chance to sort of talk about what he does, how he's gotten there, and those type of things. So I'll sort of start there, and then we'll get into the case studies next. And so, Chris, sort of the first question: how did you earn your enrolled agent credentials? Like, how do you become an enrolled agent?
Sure. So, again, thanks for having me today. I earned my credentials. I worked with a young lady in the beginning, and she resolved tax problems for a living. So I learned the ropes there. Once I knew that I enjoyed doing that, and I realized I was good at it, then I got my credentials to do it. So it was a 3-part test. The first part was about individuals and tax problems. The second was business related. And the third part was on ethics. So Circular 230 covers our ethics side of the business. And the remainder, really a lot of it starts with being able to fix a problem. So kind of looking at things from a different perspective. and putting something together backwards. Because in most situations, to fix a problem, you're starting with a balance, and then how did they get to the balance, and can you fix that from the preparation side, or does that get resolved by showing a ability or inability to pay? So it was just kind of a different way of looking at things, and putting a puzzle together really helps in your mindset.
Sure. And I mean, I can speak to this just personally. If we've used you in very similar situations, and some of these case studies are people we've helped, and so we'll talk about those in a second. But it's exactly that, right? They come in, there is some problem, they've gotten themselves in whatever the situation is, and Chris has been great to go back and sort of, one, you have to understand what the problem is, then go back in time and sort of figure out how we got there, and then from there figure out the best path forward of how to fix it. So I think that's been great. And so for Chris, what are you looking for in like an ideal client? Like someone comes to you, what would be an ideal client for you?
So an ideal client to me is someone that their tax preparation needs exceed their own comfort zone. Often I'll ask the person who prepared last year's return, if they self-prepared it, their comfort zone in doing it correctly is generally like 60%. And there's really, in my mind, not a more feared agency than the IRS. And if you're going to submit anything with that low a percentage of confidence, it's really scary that someone would move forward with that kind of percentage. The second is when they're working with another tax professional and they're not getting the attention they need, or they feel like that person's not providing any strategies, and it's just more the data entry side. And that's why I don't offer financial planning services. I don't offer bookkeeping services or payroll services, because I want a team approach. I want to work with Cardinal. I want to have them have a client and we have the ability to jointly look at their situation. The hardest part for my profession really is someone finds me in February or March after the year closes and they're looking for advice. At that point, you really need to be proactive in most situations. So I want somebody that wants a team approach. They can look at taxes like it's just alleviating a burden. I'm totally fine with that. They don't have to be interested in it, but they actually have some level of a role in it, wanting to do better. There's nothing illegal about saying you're entitled to pay the least amount of tax possible, but often that comes with some preparation in order to lead up and plan accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's great. Now, how about like different states? Are you able to work across state lines and in really any state? Can you represent a client to the state revenue service?
Yeah, fortunately, I'm licensed in all 50 states. So even states like Texas, where they don't have income tax, they can have a sales and use tax problem or other issues that arise. So it's not just income tax that a state revenue agency could show enthusiasm towards a client. So yeah, very fortunate to be able to pick up clients all across the country.
That's great. So Hans, why don't I turn it back to you and you can sort of lead us through the case studies here we have on the board.
Well, I'm going to show you a couple things. This business of obtaining the old transcripts, I mean, most of the elderly people, older people that, we work with, or perhaps we're working with somebody that's, what we call middle aged, like 65 or 60, and they're dealing with their parents' estate, or they're dealing with their parent maybe is at home and we're getting them care and we got all kinds of problems. And then we realize they haven't been handling their financial stuff is and you find out they haven't filed tax returns for a few years. And now we're hunting down all these documents to go to somebody like Chris. And Chris takes a completely different approach. He's going to get them signed up and make sure he can help them. He's going to place a call to the IRS and he's going to talk to them and say, look, here's the situation. I don't know exactly what he says, but they pull him up, they find him, and then he gets this certification with a transcript from the past years. I've seen him do this a few times. It's just amazing. And he's got it very quickly. And then it's really this tax returns filed by another is the place that I've had just a lot. These are the people that we really want to help. They're very much in need. And then I'm just thinking of myself is I haven't used him personally yet because I haven't gotten anything. But over the years, you get that letter from the IRS that just you missed a 1099 or something didn't show up on your tax return, but they have it in their records, and then you try to call them. I mean, I get something like that in the future, my next phone call is to him, and I'm going to let him handle it because they answer the phone for his calls. So I think he does a lot more than what we're talking about today. And what we want to do is just show you some real case studies here, real people that he's been able to help through us. And so, the first one, this dude inherited a lot of money from his sister and brother-in-law. Well, the brother-in-law passed first, went to the sister. The sister left, I'm talking in the millions. And we are helping him and have helped him with a lot of tax planning and IRA withdrawal planning. I mean, he had a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of responsibilities that come with millions. And one of the biggest problems is brother-in-law and sister hadn't filed tax returns in like 11 years. Now, the good news here is they had paid their taxes. So they had withholding, they had sent in quarterlies when they made withdrawals. So the taxes were pretty much paid. They just didn't file the returns. And so this guy is trying to find receipts and find all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to let Chris just talk about how you was able to help this guy in case study number 1.
Sure. So in case study 1, they actually made money off of my service. And I say that because after everything was settled and done, they received more in refunds than they actually ended up paying me to do the service. And that was accomplished because exactly what John shared, the taxpayer was responsible in the sense of making estimated payments and their withholdings were sufficient. They just didn't get around to filing tax returns. So I was able to call the IRS, do what's called a compliance check, pull the transcripts. So different transcripts show different things. Account transcripts show activity on there like estimated payments. Wage and income transcripts show what was reported on the taxpayer and also is going to show any federal withholdings. So knowing what to ask for and also having dialogue with the representative while you're on the phone to kind of let them also guide you as to what you may or may not see on their side of the screen. But more or less, we're colleagues when we're talking to each other. And then at that point, I was able to go back to the case study and be able to share with him what needed to be filed and make sure that everything that needed to be on the returns was there in order to have them process and ensure that you're not going to get a notice a few years later, when things get all settled and they're behind you. So that was a wonderful outcome in a situation where case study, a family member passed.
I mean, he had been working on this for months, not getting anywhere. This thing was resolved in a week to 10 days. And a lot of it was resolved in like 3 days. But the whole thing, it's just amazing. Okay, so let's talk about case study number 2. This is a guy who is in Florida with his wife, and then his mother is living up in the Northeast somewhere, and which is where he was brought up. And his mother has dementia. He's paying for, she's, I believe, 78 years old. She's had dementia in progressive manner for 4 or 5 years. She had a partner, a lifelong partner, or not lifelong, but many years partner, who did all the taxes. And he passed away like 3 years ago. So nothing's been filed for 3 years. And he was dealing with me over like, he needs to better manage her money, be a better steward of her, because he's now doing it. He has the power of attorney. And so he's wanting my advice on how to manage things, how to withdraw from the IRAs, how to invest the money, just all that kind of stuff. But the tax returns are in arrears for 3 years. And then he was talking about, he thinks that his mother had just been throwing the stuff in the trash as it came in, all the 1099s. They wouldn't get any W-2s if they got any K-1s. And so he didn't know what to do. And so I suggested a meeting with Chris, and I'll just let Chris talk about what you did.
Yeah, so in that scenario, I refer to the case study as the adult child. So the adult child ends up having the burden of handling a parent's tax return. And in that situation, it's very common that if someone starts to have a cognitive issue, the tax preparer doesn't know that's the case. So they just think that the taxpayer has moved on, found somebody else. So nobody's following up to realize missing returns are starting to accumulate. So in this situation, again, able to contact the IRS, do a compliance check, and see what years needed to be filed, pulling the transcripts to show what was overlooked, as well as the withholdings that the federal government already had on the account. And I think in this one, actually, it turned up an IRA that was unknown to the family member. So at that point, it kind of gave them a roadmap as to some other savings that were available, which was huge because that money can be used to help take care of the parent. And really, with the mail being thrown away, it's likely they would have never found that account.
Yeah. I mean, this is another person, a hand in the dark. I mean, and just the look on the people's face when this thing is resolved in just a short period of time. And then we can get on to looking after mom and getting her the care. And then we can get into looking after son, because he's kind of at wit's end because he wants to be a proper steward of this money. And he's the only person that's going to inherit after she passes away. But I don't sense any self-interest with this guy, but he wants to get the money straight, and we're going to help him with that. But it's kind of hard to do that with this unknown tax thing in the past. So, and now we're going to talk a little bit about case study number 3. This is a lady that had her taxes filed at a senior center, and she had, Chris was able to help her quite a bit. So I'll let you talk about her, Chris.
Sure. In case study number 3, it started with current year prep. So she was current. And when I looked at her current year prep and compared it to the most recent filed return, I saw some inconsistencies and it just didn't look right. So we talked about me calling the IRS for her because in that situation, her deceased husband had been handling the prep in the past. It was her first year doing it on her own. And it just didn't seem right that the tax bill for the current year would be so low, but for the 2 prior years, it would be so high. So after reviewing the transcripts, we ended up amending the 2 most recent years and saving her, it was upwards of about $16,000 between the 2 years. And it was just an oversight. So getting her taxes done for free ended up being a very expensive free item for her, just because the prior preparer just didn't know how to enter a certain transaction, and she wasn't getting credit for some of the basis that she was entitled to. So without getting into too much tax talk, it was a fantastic outcome for someone, which has led to a long-term client for me with her paying the appropriate amount of tax.
That's awesome. And this last person, here we got Dad, who's got a good bit amount of money, lives in Florida, coming to see the son in North Carolina, goes into a casino, wins some money, gets a 1099, and I don't know what he did with it, but Florida doesn't have state taxes. Perhaps he paid the federal tax, but he gets a 1099 from North Carolina, and he doesn't do anything with it. And then he ends up with a tax bill of like $60,000 because they put the tax on all of his income. I'll let you tell the story, Chris.
No, you're spot on. So what ended up happening was he did win a little bit of money in the casino. A notice comes 2 years after the actual winnings happened, and it's for about $60,000 from the NCDOR. And so I call because, I mean, a $60,000 state tax bill is tremendous. So I call, and after 2 hours on the phone, the tax bill is less than $600. So the only reason 98% of the tax went away was because the state of North Carolina thought he was a resident for the entire year, and they were trying to tax his entire federal income, whereas really they were only due tax on the winnings from the casino. So I was able to explain that through the IRS transcripts showing he had a mortgage back then 2 years ago, because in the present day, he was living with his son and the son was taking care of him. So you could see how hard it is to remember what you did 2 weeks ago, let alone what your dad was doing 2 years ago. So from my perspective, again, that was about 60 grand worth of inheritance that the son actually was able to have, or it could have been used towards the care of his father. So, that the whole point of that case study was really to show that agencies can make mistakes. The IRS makes mistakes. The DOR makes mistakes. You can't just because it comes from them doesn't mean it's accurate. Sometimes it's well worth looking into.
Okay, great. And at the beginning, when we were preparing for this, Tom, you were pointing out that Chris does a lot more than fix problems for seniors. And we've used him in our practice in a lot of different situations. So maybe you want to talk just real quickly, Tom, about some of the wider services that as you see it, that Chris has helped us with.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he is very good at solving problems. And certainly when we have a client that is in one of these situations, Chris is the first person we go to help us with this. But we have a lot of people that don't have problems. It's pretty straightforward. They just don't want to file their taxes and they reach out to us because we talk so much about taxes on our videos. Like, hey, do you guys file tax returns? And the answer is no, we're not. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an enrolled agent. I cannot file your tax returns for you. And so we will often refer people to Chris, where he can go through, and it's not a problem. It's just literally filing someone's tax return because they don't want to manage it on their own. And so that is a service that we use him often for. And so if you're reaching out to us wanting us to file taxes, again, we don't do that. We have other professionals we refer you to. Similarly, like with legal work, a lawyer, if you come in wanting a will or something, I don't write wills. I kind of know what you need and I can communicate that to an attorney, but I need to refer you to an attorney. So it's great to have these people that we can refer clients to when they need something that we don't provide. And so Chris does lots of stuff. And so maybe I'll push it to you, Chris. I mean, are there things that you do that we haven't really hit on that you want to just point out to anyone who's watching the video?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Tom. I'd say most of what I do, 60% or more, is resolve tax problems. So that is my niche when it comes to that. The remaining is keeping clients compliant, that I'm a great fit to work with. So I can fix a problem for a restaurant, but I'm not a great fit to do their prep. I'm not looking to do a tax return for IBM. For me, my sweet spot is typically working with a self-employed person that's a solopreneur, but at the same time, it's also the person that needs a basic tax return done. So if I'm not a great fit, I can advise accordingly. But resolving a problem and getting a transparent, honest perspective, I have a complimentary consultation when it comes to that. And the main problem in my industry, I would say, when it comes to the resolution, you hear the commercials all the time, and the commercials are pay pennies on the dollar. And to address that, those are legitimate programs, but very few people qualify for it. So just make sure before you commit to writing a check for $10,000 to a service that's going to help you pay a fraction of what you actually owe, that you thoroughly understand what you're getting yourself into, because it's the IRS is not going to accept a dollar less if they have the ability to collect it over the terms that work for them. So just don't fall victim to somebody over promising and under delivering.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, what I want to point out is if you want to get in touch with Chris, you're free to contact him directly. You can get in touch with us, and if we have a feeling that you need Chris, and we'll make the referral. And as you know, Tom and I are fiduciaries, so we're going to send you to Chris when it's in your best interest. And so I want to just talk about, like, back to what Tom was talking about. Why are we doing? How does this fit into our practice where we're doing financial planning? I mean, we do tax planning, and that's kind of the last box here, where somebody that comes to us at 65 years old, we're going to have a focus of like the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 30 years of smoothing out their taxes and doing things and to have them pay the least amount of tax or keep the most amount of their money. We're forward looking. And so we don't do any tax prep or backwards looking stuff. I mean, we look backwards to just see where you've been, but this is where Chris fits in, very practically speaking. Somebody comes to us, they're in a need, they've got some pain with something. We got to deal with that before we plan out their future. And today, we've pretty much, we've talked a little bit about 401k IRA. I mean, I heard that come up. And we talked about income in terms of income tax. And we talked about estate planning when we're just, when you're in probate, when you're the executor of like your parents' will, and you are trying to get this thing through probate and then pass out the years and just have it behind you, you have to have the final tax return done, and you have to certify to the court that the final, that the taxes have been paid. And that's where this case study number one, he really came to us for estate planning and financial management, but we couldn't do any of that until we dealt with the past taxes. So with that being said, I'm Hans Scheil.
And I'm Tom Griffith.
Chris Cherico.
And we thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you.